And then the left wonders why exactly people feel like the country is coming apart. Maybe it's because you're attacking the fundamental basis of Western civilization and pretending that you're not. Maybe it's because of that. So whenever I read stories like this, there's always a backlash that occurs from the left-wing types. Like, well, why are you even paying attention to this? Because it's on the front page of the New York Times website. That's why. So my favorite game that the left plays is they point out something that is radical, specifically because they hope to shift the debate. And when you notice, they're like, why are you even noticing? I'm noticing because you're doing it. That would be the reason why. And then you wonder why it feels like the country is coming apart at the seams. That would be precisely the reason. And so Pete Buttigieg, right, yesterday, he was on State of the Union on CNN, and he says, we on the left, we're not starting the culture wars. So right now, the left is pushing through the House. They just pushed through the House with a bunch of Republican votes, a bill that gets rid of the Defense of Marriage Act and essentially enshrines in law Obergefell, which is the Supreme Court case saying that same-sex marriage is purely legally equivalent to heterosexual marriage in every single way. It goes a little bit further than that, actually. But again, it essentially makes the law of the land that you are a bigot if you believe that heterosexual marriage is in any way different or superior to homosexual marriage. And people just says, we're not declaring the culture war. No, you kind of are. You kind of are. And just because the left has been winning the culture war doesn't mean that if you continue to push, that you're going to continue to win the culture war. Everybody is pretty tolerant up until the time you start suggesting that they get to teach your kid, that you get to teach their kids your particular form of anti-traditional morality. Here's Pete Buttigieg, who apparently he's very fond of speaking up on everything except for transportation policy. When it comes to actually, fixing the supply chain bottleneck, then he's completely uninterested in the job. When it comes to speaking about gay marriage, then of course he is first he's Johnny on the spot. Here's Pete Buttigieg yesterday.
In the work that we're doing, we have found that not everybody is prepared to hear about justice and equity in the context of transportation. As if transportation is somehow uniquely immune to the impacts of patterns of exclusion and racial injustice that have touched every other part of our society. So I just want to make clear, we're not the ones looking for culture wars. We're just trying to do what's right, healing the broken places in our country.
They're not looking for culture wars, except for how every single day they're looking for culture wars, right? Of course, and this stretches not just from issues of marriage, it also stretches to indoctrinating your kids in radical gender ideology. It extends to extending abortion to all stages of pregnancy. And Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, yesterday, she was trying to talk about the GOP and abortion, suggesting that, again, there's only one priority when it comes to abortion, and that is the autonomy of a woman over her own body. Forget about the countervailing interest of a child in actually living and not being killed. That apparently does not exist, according to the vice president of the United States.
We must stand and say it is wrong-headed and intended to harm when you pass laws that deny a woman a right to make decisions about her body, when you pass laws that suggest there's not even an exception for rape or incest. I personally prosecuted cases involving child sexual assault. It's an uncomfortable topic. People don't want to talk about it, but it's real and it happens. And that child and that woman should not have to endure an act of extreme violence and then not have the ability to have agency and autonomy to decide what happens next.
They always use the edge cases, like a 10-year-old gets raped and then wants an abortion. By the way, very likely if a 10-year-old gets pregnant, that she's going to need an abortion in order to live, because the simple fact of the matter is the 10-year-olds are generally not capable of bearing children. But Kamala Harris, there's a key phrase that she uses there, intended to harm, right? The idea is that if you oppose her, you intend to harm. And the same thing from Pete Buttigieg. If you oppose anything in Pete Buttigieg's agenda, it's not because you have disagreements over the societal standard that ought to be applied to human behavior. No, it's intended to harm. It's intended to harm. Right? This is part and parcel of a broader leftist rubric, whereby if you disagree with them, you're not just the culture warriors. You are the people who are putting the country on the brink of disaster. And then, if you notice this, if you say, guys, you're tearing the country apart, that is when the media jump in and they say, well, you're the ones who are provoking. So if you push to the left, if you greenlight riots in the middle of 2020, if you, like Vice President Harris, try to bail out rioters in the middle of riots in 2020, if you push on the idea that children can be boys or girls and they should be taught that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, if you suggest that all forms of human sexual relations are morally equivalent, and that must be taught at every level and enshrined in every area of American law. If you suggest that any restriction on abortion whatsoever is an attack on a woman, and then people say no, then the idea is that they're the ones who are starting the Civil War. And this is how you end up with a piece by Dave Weigel in the Washington Post titled, "On the Campaign Trail, Many Republicans Talk of Violence. In both swing states and safe seats, Republican candidates say that liberals hate them personally and may turn rioters or a police state on people who disobey them." I wonder why people might have that thought. I wonder why people might have the radical thought that there are people on the left who hate their guts. Why would they think that after listening to the Vice President of the United States say that if you're pro-life, it's because you have intent to harm? Why might they think that? Why might they think, after listening to Pete Buttigieg suggest repeatedly that you're a bad person if you disagree that homosexual marriage and heterosexual marriage are morally equivalent? This means that you're a bigot. Why might they think that they are under some sort of dire threat? Why? It's all a mystery wrapped in an enigma. When they listen to people on the left suggest that disagreement amounts to a form of violence and that they are about to overthrow the country, why do you think people might feel a little bit threatened? For example, Al Gore, right, he's back out of the woodwork now because it's really hot. Every time it gets hot during the summer, we call Al Gore out of the woodwork to fly his private jet into the green room at CNN and explain just why things are so bad. Al Gore over the weekend suggested that people who disagree with him on the climate are like the Uvalde officers who allowed a mass shooter to murder children in a classroom while doing nothing. Here is Al Gore, who's gotten extremely rich being a green advocate while raking in the green.
You know, the climate deniers are really in some ways similar to all of those almost 400 law enforcement officers in Uvalde, Texas, who were waiting outside an unlocked door while the children were being massacred. They heard the screams, they heard the gunshots, and nobody stepped forward. And God bless those families who've suffered so much. And law enforcement officials tell us that's not typical of what law enforcement usually does. And confronted with this global emergency, what we're doing with our inaction and failing to walk through the door and stop the killing is not typical of what we are capable of as human beings.
Well, it's the same. Why might you think that people like Al Gore hate you? Why? It's again, giant mysteries. And MSNBC's Malcolm Nance. Right? So Malcolm Nance, he and I appeared together on Bill Maher, where he suggested that every Republican was complicit in January 6th and wanted to overthrow the government, and that we were at the moment when democracy was going to be overthrown by these people. But if you notice that that's extreme radical rhetoric that borders on the Civil War type of rhetoric that has been common throughout American history, unfortunately. If you note that, then that's because you want the Civil War. Here's MSNBC's Malcolm Nance predicting that there will be no more elections ever if Republicans win, which, by the way, is kind of a Civil War-like call, right? If the suggestion is, if your opponents win, it's the end of the country, what choice do you have but to use every tool at your disposal to stop them from winning? Here's Malcolm Nance.
The Democrats, Joe Biden, all the rest of them need to understand they are, what are we, July, August, September, October, November. You are 4 months from the end of American democracy. 4 months. And we said that in 2020, and that was true then too, right? But now you're talking about putting a party in power in which there will never be another election. They will vote through every piece of legislation and defund every component of the United States government. They're not joking about impeaching Joe Biden every week, okay, and Kamala Harris, and getting rid of people or expanding the Supreme Court, whatever it is they think they can do, even though some of it's crazy. First thing that they said, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert said, we will criminally prosecute every person who took part in the January 6th investigation.
Guys, if we don't stop those evil people who disagree with us, they're going to burn down the country. So we'll use every means at our disposal. Why might Republicans feel threatened? I don't understand. They're only attacking, the left is only saying that if you back fundamental societal institutions, it's because you're a bigot. And if you notice health statistics, it's probably because you're a bigot. And if you are a person who does not agree with Al Gore on climate, it's because you're essentially a passive murderer. And also you want to overthrow elections. But probably there are people who want to live with you, the people who are saying this sort of stuff. Probably. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.